born, you have to figure out a way to make money. You have to figure out a way to, do all the things that you want to do, buy a house, feed yourself, and the reality is, you need money. As soon as you get that first $100, you are in debt. The first thing that you do as a person who has a dollar is become a slave to a system, because you are constantly going to be sitting around paying off that debt. People don't understand when we say to them, you owe the Federal Reserve $40,000 per person. But the reality is, they will take it back from you via taxation, mostly via inflation over time. So, there's this wonderful concept called debt bondage that you can look up. And debt bondage is an arrangement whereby a person is forced to pay a loan for which a direct labor is placed in place of currency over an agreed or obscure period of time, where a debtor is tricked or trapped into working for very little or no pay. Well, the reality is, they don't work for very little or no pay. They work for pay that can never actually equal the dollar that was given them to begin with. So it doesn't matter if it's exact debt bondage, they've created a system that keeps us feeding them. Now, if we think about slavery in general, it's very, very interesting. If I was a slave owner, what do I have to do? I have to go out and I have to buy clothing for my slaves. I have to go out and I have to feed my slaves, and I have to provide my slaves with shelter. But if I control the currency of a country, if I control the currency of a country and I make you work every day and you are always in debt to me, what does that happen? What happens there? You actually have to work, the same as a slave does. But you know what? You have to provide your own clothing. You have to provide for your own shelter. You have to provide for your own food. So all we've done is we've taken slavery and we've made you enslave yourselves. And you're still working to pay back the debt that was there the day that you took the first dollar. How bad is it? The reality is, it's so bad that we fought a revolution over it. This is why we went to war. So every day, what do people want to do? They want to come home, they want to go home to their families, they want to live their lives. But you know what? A whole bunch of people realized exactly what was going on 200 plus years ago, and they realized that, you know what? We are slaves. And if we don't want to be slaves, we have to stand up. Ben Franklin, the refusal of King George to allow the colonies to operate an honest colonial money system, which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators, was probably the prime cause of the revolution. So people were willing to die to get out of slavery and the corrupt money system. And the reality is that our forefathers, a lot of them look at them and they say, oh, their thinking is old and everything has changed today and we've modernized the world. The reality is they were probably a lot more intelligent than we are today. They weren't technologically advanced as we are today, because we've had the ability and the fortune to build upon the inventions over time, but these individuals were all multilingual. They didn't have TV sucking the information out of their head and turning them into drones. They were educating themselves all of the time. And the reality is, economics hasn't changed. Okay? Economics hasn't changed. Politics, it hasn't changed. It is the same as it has always been. They had to deal with the same personality issues and the same financial issues that we do today. They were smarter, they were better educated, they knew what they were doing, and they were willing to die to get out of the very system that we find ourselves in right now. Central banks have been around for a very long time. So don't think that the Federal Reserve System is something that is new and creative. They started off in China, the Song Dynasty, 960 AD. Now, they started printing money, and they also had gold and silver and jewels and stuff like that. But the next dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, which was from 1271 to 1368, they used complete paper money. So all the way back in 1368, we had an entire country that was all using paper money. And you know what happened? They created inflation that completely wiped out the country, and nobody would trade with them. China got decimated in the 1300s because of fiat currency. Paper money, the stuff that we deal with every single day. And what happened? The Ming Dynasty had to abolish it. And then they shut the door to China. And China didn't trade with anybody else after that. because they had ruined the country so much with this. In the medieval times, the Knights Templar, this mythical organization that we see in books like the Da Vinci Code, they really existed, and they were the first guys to introduce paper money. The difference between the Knights Templar is the paper money that they introduced, they actually gave something back for it, because there wasn't any interest on it. So this stuff has been around for a long time. And what's the purpose of the Fed, and why do we do it? The Fed, the reserve banks, set the interest rates, and they control inflation by giving more of this or giving less of this. So every single time they give you $1, they put you more in debt, and every single time they give you $1, they make the dollar that they gave you worth less. That is what is inflation. And the reality is, you hear people always say, oh, deflation is the worst thing in the world. Deflation is only the worst thing in the world if it actually means that they start firing people at companies, which doesn't necessarily happen when you go through deflation. But what deflation would do is it would make every dollar for every person who actually saved that dollar wealthier, because you could buy more. And for some reason, they have been able to convince the American people that that's a bad thing. So Amanda talked about this briefly, but who made the Fed? People who made the Fed already knew that this system existed. They knew how to manipulate it. They were bankers. How did they create the Fed? Well, the reality is about 80% of the population back in the early 1900s was completely against the concept of a central bank. But J.P. Morgan had about 1/6 of the money in America at that point in time. And J.P. Morgan owned all of the media in the greater New York area, and J.P. Morgan went on the streets and he told everybody that there is going to be a failure in the banking system. And he caused a run on a bank, 100% artificial run on a bank. And everybody ran down to the bank, and they took all their money out, and then the bank collapsed. And then everybody went to all the other banks, because they were like, oh my God, that bank went out of business. What's going to happen to our money? And then, here come the politicians. The politicians and the bankers together in collusion come out and say, you know what, if we had a reserve bank, we wouldn't have this problem. Because we would be able to adjust the currency as needed and push money into the system and pull money out of the system and create stability. That's Keynesian economic principles. I'm not going to get into that right now. But that's what they sold the American people. And that's how they got through it. There were corrupt legislators. Nelson Aldrich was connected to the Rockefellers, one of the families that benefited greatly from this meeting on Jekyll Island where the Federal Reserve was created. So you have a senator that's creating some of this legislation, and he's tied to the family that profits. Woodrow Wilson, the guy who signed the bill into law, before he was president, he sat down with these bankers, and he said, you know what, I don't have enough money to campaign. And they said, hey, we'll give you all the money that you need if you promise as soon as you're in office that you sign this little bill that takes over all the money system of the American people and enslaves them forever. So Woodrow Wilson said, yeah, for president, I'll do that. So he did it, signed it, and then they pushed it through Congress just before Christmas. So just enough legislators were there to vote on it, but just enough legislators were not in town to fight it, because they knew what was going to happen. How does it operate? The Federal Reserve is no different than a cartel. So when we think of cartels, what do you think of? Drug smuggling, cocaine, the mafia. That is what our Federal Reserve operates like. It's not public, it's not private. These are quotes from the Federal Reserve about the Federal Reserve. So, the system is independent of other branches and agencies of government. It is self-financed and therefore not subject to the congressional budgetary process, i.e., there's no accountability. They have no budget. Hey, I want some more money for something because I want to give somebody a loan, I print it. There is no approval process. There is nothing. That's why Bernanke can stand in front of you and say, I've decided to print $600 billion more and put you and your kids more in debt. And nobody can really do anything to stop it. It's owned by member banks. So the reality is, there is stock in the Federal Reserve. Every single Federal Reserve gives out stock. And banks own this wonderful stock. But is it really stock? You can't buy it. You can't sell it. It's not worth anything. And every person who holds this stock gets paid 6% per year. Where does that 6% come from? If the Federal Reserve doesn't have any money? It comes from you. It's the taxation. Basically, this is an agreement between a whole bunch of agencies, a whole bunch of banks. And they've done it legally because they've got collusion and backing of our government. Every single cartel in the world, the Mexican cartels, the drug cartels, the one dream that every cartel has is that they can get backing from their local government. Do you know why? Because a cartel is just an agreement between me and you. And if I agree that I'm going to sell cocaine for $10, and you agree, okay, we're not going to compete, so you're going to sell it for $10, and tomorrow you say, oh, I've decided to sell my cocaine for $15, there's nothing I can do to you. That's how cartels break up, and that's why you see violence in areas that do a lot of drug activity, because their agreements go awry. So what did we do? We brought a cartel in. We brought a cartel in to run our monetary system. And then what we did was we said, hey, you know what? Let's make it so that it's illegal to break the cartel agreement. It is the ultimate cartel running our financial system. Where does it get its money? I've talked about it. It gets it from thin air. It has no actual assets. The only assets that the Federal Reserve actually has is the stuff that it stole. In 1933, there was the wonderful Gold Act, where the government went out and told every individual that if you have gold in your house, you have to give it to us. And we'll give you paper back. Yay, paper. Because it's so much better than gold. They took it all. They said it was illegal to have it. Now, they did not go house to house and knock on people's doors and obstruct it that way. But people, sheeple, they all decided, hey, you know what, the government wants our money, they're going to give us these little notes and we can get our money back if we bring it back. Oh, we trust the government, here's our gold. Look what happened. Now the Federal Reserve has gold because they stole it, and they put you in debt every day because they're printing money. QE2. They just print money. There's nothing behind it. It means nothing. And every dollar that you have in your bank account is now worth less because they did it. Came from nowhere, it's worth nothing, it's devaluatory. The Federal Reserve is the problem. So, the original Federal Reserve was created because they created a hoax and they created a panic. What's the purpose? They're there to control inflation. They're there to stabilize the economy. But the Federal Reserve, through the pulling back of bonds, caused the panic of 1920. The Federal Reserve, on October 24th of 1929, made the margin call loan that made the Great Depression. It was the original crash of the Great Depression where 16,000 banks were closed,